in June of 2019, I put a lot of thoughts regarding the sun in writing. Today, I'm going to go over one of those sections regarding my personal experiences with the sun, why in my own area of research I've been drawn to look at the geomagnetic storms and their impact over our reality and major world events. Okay, so that's what we're going to be going over today. These are just random slides. The main focus is the audio. I'm coming from a place that's looking at various effects of these geomagnetic storms and jerks in our weakening magnetic field. Okay. Various aspects, from the vulnerable power grid infrastructure to the outbreak of new massive wars to the connection to spiritual experiences. And these are all based on my personal life experiences, inner sense, as well as the available data that I've been able to find and archive. Humanity's evolution forward has a distinct cycle on, cycle off effect. All these major world changes, from natural disasters to full-scale riots to social upheaval, the good and the bad, in my understanding, it's all cyclical and it follows the path of the sun. The dire situation that we are in geopolitically has sent me looking in the direction of what's influencing the cycles of war and peace. I have also noticed a pattern of humans that have logged their Chinese invasion dreams online, including a friend and a past guest on this program. For years, he's been looking at similar themes and warning signs. Looking for a pattern in there, we can even call this a collective RV coming through the dream realms. I determined by 2008 or so that this potential event could potentially occur again near a solar peak, as we see these wars kick off around solar peaks or right before, sometimes just after. We're talking about a pattern of war and peace that we've already discussed. And so around 2013, I put the spotlight on the era surrounding 2025. As we look at the potential for World War III between the West and the East in the near future, it's important to know that these links between geomagnetic storms and wars are documented, yet it's been overlooked by mainstream society and most researchers of various fields. I myself have always been sensitive to energies, especially when there's a great change in magnetism in the air. I was born February 25th, 1980, several months before the eruption of Mount St. Helens. This period featured the most sunspots in that particular solar cycle. I've concluded that there's more than one reason that the sun is a core interest of mine. I don't yet think I consciously know all the reasons that I'm on this path. What I can say with full confidence is that the life events that I've experienced in the last 39 years have been my greatest teachers as to how the cycles of the sun greatly influence patterns of experience, expression, perception, and the lifetimes within our own lifetimes. I've always felt that my life cycle or even path for some reason was lined up with the Earth or something else. Now the signs more or less point to the solar cycle. When I turned 20 in 2000, I was incredibly affected by then a very active solar cycle and was left feeling very emotional and lost before the quiet after the storm brought clarity and a sense of realization as to what my path was. Now, I do recall having daydreams of a future under a red sky in the mid-1980s when I grew up, by the way, in Aurora, Oregon, just south of Portland, imagining on the farm, the 40 acres there, a super solar flare, some kind of event. By the way, that's where I grew up with my single mother, without religion, right? But there was an interest in spirituality. But it was a different childhood than some childhoods. And it wasn't perfect, right? I intend to write a book. I'm kind of like pausing from the script right now and letting you know there's a deeper story behind how I've come to a lot of my ideas. And so that's kind of one of the next projects that I want to complete. Some things are difficult to write about, to be frank. And so as this cycle begins, if you will, this is a time in which I want to move my own personal projects forward. But I remember in that period having daydreams of the future. My mother did believe in spiritual principles to a certain degree, and the energies of the mid-'80s really stands out as a period like no other, and it made way for the things that happened later and the many places that I moved to before I was even 18 years old. Okay. I did hold on to that waking vision of the potential of our world going through some sort of incredible transformation throughout most of my life. The rise of artificial intelligence and even machines reading our brain waves also appeared in my imagination, either as our future or maybe something that was ongoing. The scanning of brain waves, imagining it, basically on a sunny day in 1985, that type of reality. There's also a certain amount of movies that were coming out then that dealt with some of those themes. I also remember in high school in the mid-1990s, specifically it would be late 1995 in Springfield, Virginia. And there was a short story for English class that I remember writing up, and I was focusing on a robot takeover of humanity by 2035. The short story there, what I can remember, was that it was more or less getting out of a time machine, and the place being Portland, Oregon, and a robot asking me for my identification. And my lack of identification for this robot resulted in detention. Now that we're seeing stories, literally, about robots in Los Angeles, not just the robots that are flying over our head in the form of a drone, but actual law enforcement robots, has me looking a little bit more at these dates that initially had my fascination. Major things were taking place throughout my life during the solar maxima portion of the solar cycle peak of 23. This subject of the human behavior response to solar flares isn't something that I went to school to learn. It's something that I experienced intimately in the explosive 2000s living in Portland, Oregon. Now today, my sights are on the 2020s, where X marks the spot. A period of time of great energetic conjuncture for many reasons, from survival to spiritual. And it's going to be in another video, an essay reading in which I describe being outside the box of just a survivalist or a spiritualist or a spiritual researcher or a person trying to explore their spirituality without Orthodox religion, as well as being a researcher that's not bound to one line of research. So an outside-the-box researcher, as well as surviving day-to-day, using the power of the sun to basically power all of this that I'm using right now, as well as the spiritual side of it all. So it's really a blend, and I'll get into that a little bit deeper. When I discovered the patterns of the solar cycle influence over so many aspects of our reality in my mid-20s, it greatly accelerated elements of an understanding that previously was missing within me in both my own life as well as research into world affairs and spiritual matters. It was like the discovery of a key puzzle piece that I needed to get through the next door of understanding. I'm sharing these powerful ideas in order to help people understand how they are affected by the sun, in order to help them find ways to cope with the effects, and to show them the ways in which the powers that be may be using the cycle and the knowledge of the sun against us. So after a decade of focused interest in all known scientific studies that human consciousness is affected bear with me. Okay, after a decade of focused interest in all known scientific studies that human consciousness is affected, I've concluded that it's likely possible that we can also harness the power of the sun within our own minds. Numerous studies also suggest the power of collective focused intent. So naturally, it makes sense to wonder if we are missing something about our natural connection to the sun that we are never taught by the consensus reality of mass consciousness. Like, I'm talking like it's not even passed on in like normal conversation. And we're like a society that should be more aware of certain things and less distracted by other things. This is a time in which technology has permitted this information to be available to so many. And so that's why I'm putting the spotlight on this. My ideas come from a place of deep study, inner knowing, and a cycle of lifetimes within lifetimes that has closely followed the solar cycle, even down to the months or days. And so, again, a deeper story about my life would focus on major personal life changes down to the days, down to the hours in some cases of a geomagnetic storm, and a major change taking place right around that period. Now, my own experience as an independent media activist and online philosopher in current affairs began several years after the grand solar maxima cycle of 23, which is the unfortunate period that we saw the events of 9/11, manifesting during the peak portion of the solar cycle, even geomagnetic activity on the day of the event itself. The changes in that solar cycle occurred as I was waking up from my own limited understanding of who I was, as I was literally catapulted out of my own dark ages. Now, a quick point about that solar cycle. Now, we saw the conclusion of the millennia as we hit 2000 during that cycle peak, carrying forward to 2001. And that was a stronger cycle than previous solar cycles. And we've seen slightly weaker cycles in 24 and what's expected for 25. That doesn't mean that the impact is going to be weak. We're going to get into that again in future videos, how with a thinning, weakening, shifting Earth's magnetic field, we're more susceptible to even mild solar flares or moderate solar flares. In October of 2003, the largest solar flare in some time hit the Earth. And it was during this time that, for unknown reasons, my sciatic nerve went out. And believe it or not, I was on a cane for a few weeks with no other suspect other than overstretching or some exercise. Okay, but by the Venus transit of June 5th, 2004, something inside me was all of a sudden empowered to take the steps that I had previously been contemplating, thinking about, musing upon, to take various concerns and opinions about this reality to Portland cable access, and later the internet with my websites and YouTube channel, meeting many people in the research community as well as the audience. The alternative media was growing quickly after the war in Iraq began, and as the intensity of the solar peak slowed down to a calmer tone. YouTube was launched during this phase of the cycle in 2006, and my own progress steadied still. The digital media, social media circus element brought a instrumental positive new change for citizen journalists, especially when it launched. It's kind of changed since then, but at its launch, it was some positive change for citizen journalists, activists, and voices not normally heard by the mainstream media, and people that are, not able to finance their own video streaming services, right? YouTube provided that. Prior to YouTube, I was looking around going, hey, how do I get some affordable streaming services? And I was actually getting quotes for actual costs that definitely out of budget, then as well as now. So YouTube played a role in the quiet after the storm, in alternative media moving forward. Looking back, there was a lot of productivity in my own life as the maxima morphed into the minima, despite the setback of a world thrust into a new war and a growing surveillance society state. It was like the energy settled down to a time-space reality where we were talking about our powerful ideas or visions and working to make sense of it all, while applying focus not previously expressed. Meanwhile, in the streets of Portland, a calmer tone dominated the city vibes during those years until the solar cycle started up again. Late 2008 brought not only Baker bailouts, but snowstorms that had me stuck at home for weeks. My discussions and writings on the sun began as the solar minima period came to a close, the solar minimum. By then, I had interviewed nearly 100 guests over time, not all of which had been archived for the internet audience. Some things just went to air. And during those days, it was a little more difficult to archive things compared to today, where it's much, much easier. The experience of hosting a show for my community on cable access felt more like a spiritual experience and expression of my then transformation from the prior place in life and consciousness that I was at. However, I sensed new changes for myself in the new cycle ahead. I just didn't know what, but what I did begin to envision was a long-term idea of off-grid freedom. Freedom from the urban cage of Portlandia, a dream that did eventually manifest. I began to look more directly at research about the solar cycle influence over our world, especially wars, natural disasters, things like earthquakes. Take a look at what's happening now. Battles, civil unrest. As I felt changes within myself and my focus, I can also see things in the world in real time. And I made the connection. It wasn't like reading something, just from the other researchers that I've mentioned in other videos. It was me having the experience. It was me having the experience first, the ups and the downs within myself first. Later, getting into research. And later connecting the dots going, whoa. I would even call it the aha moment. And I'm promoting the idea of the aha moment where people know where they were at in key parts of the cycle, where they can connect the dots for themselves. The newswire and the alternative media press was fresh with alarmist headlines concerning the years ahead, including 2012, but not limited to, as I was about to witness a collective mindset of reactionaryism caught up in a form of a term that I've coined, catastrophobia. Not that there aren't things to be concerned with, there are, but rather I believe I discovered a link between sunspot peaks and a primal fear of doom that echoes on cue throughout key periods of the solar cycle. I'm going to pause there. There is more than a few reasonable reasons to be prepared and to be aware. But sometimes people don't really understand on a physical level how their bodies could be responding to other changes that are affecting the planet. We need to remain grounded and not overreact to the impulse of feelings. And by the way, these are just nature pictures that I took. I am focused on what I'm reading now, but there's a background slideshow. And that is a picture that I took of a tree at Laurelhurst Park in Portland. So this is just a general theme of nature. So was this. And it led me to wonder, is there consciousness, is there spirit in nature that perhaps people have overlooked. And so I'm coming from a place in which my soul is asking those questions out in the open. My body is a vessel for the spirit within me that is choosing within my lifetime to bring attention to these mysteries in our reality. And so some people may not think that nature is as full of life, and that's okay. But it's something that we need to pause and come back to, and that this examination of the sun and other things is really a front, really, for a deeper spiritual experience. I truly believe that. Going back to my writing, and I'm discussing again how I stumbled upon this path. Looking at it from the year 2009, which was pretty instrumental in me moving things forward. I moved to connect the dots in a paper I authored on the changes in the sun and the Earth's weakening magnetic field while citing the known influences of the cycles of world wars and revolutions, as well as more basic changes in cognitive function. By 2010, I recall waking up from sleep as solar flares were hitting the Earth and making the news. I would visit spaceweather.com and spaceweather.gov, and I could see the planetary K index when it was in the red, when it was in the yellow. You know, the city of Portland had more intense protests, near riots, and drive-by shootings. The effect on urban crime and war became a main topic from then on, as so much content in the independent media has come from a place of concern regarding the nature in which these wars are being waged, as well as their outcome or the agenda of the warmongers. By late 2011, Occupy Wall Street seemed empowered by the rise of the solar cycle. Even if the participants were unaware of the correlation, years earlier, the rise of the Tea Party could be seen on the other side of the political polarity. Political passions on all sides, in all countries, are amplified as the cycle ramps up again. Between 2012 and 2013, I was living off the grid in the San Luis Valley. I had no internet and spent a lot of direct time under the sun while writing about the sun in a region that looked like the land before time, or like something out of Star Wars, to be frank. It was a cold winter and spring. It was in the cold winter and spring months in a non-insulated yurt that I put together a slideshow presentation on the sun that I later traveled to Philly by plane to present. And I was also harassed by airport security on the way out. I'm not sure if it was worth the body scanner and pat down on the way out of the city. In reflection, I can see how my dramatic off-grid lifestyle shift came during a time of major energetic shift on the planet. There was a reason I think that I chose to isolate from society during that period and the electric grid itself. While living in a yurt in the high desert, it somehow brought in the focus to make the points that I did. Now, I had some challenges after that, but I do in my own life notice a correlation between periods in which I put out new information about the sun and certain challenges that I faced in the world. Whereas previously, where I was more on the conspiratorial path without discussing the sun, things were far less complicated. It was also a different time in the cycle then. So reiterating what I just went through, when the cycle picked up, 2008, 2009, I had another awakening within me that was aligning with the path of the sun, the events taking place on Earth and the activity of the sun, like even riots in Portland. There was a shooting within the city, and there was the way that the people reacted. And I'll never forget that April 2010 period in which all of a sudden there was all this increased activity that no one could explain. And yet here I was waking up when the sun was more active. They say that there are portals connecting the sun to the earth, and that when there's a shift on the sun, we can feel it within 8 to 9 minutes on a electric level, maybe even within our own body on a nervous system level. And that's the type of experience that I was starting to have on a more direct level. Feeling the effects of the sun while living in Portland in this particular body. I was feeling it. And I was seeing evidence of society feeling it. Okay, and going back to the essay. So since the last solar cycle's peak, I've had a chance to settle down again where I've been observing the social dynamics under a deep solar minimum, as well as my own behavioral emotional response, as well as the influence of the moon phases. My own periods of migration and massive change have continued to line up with the sun's activity and cycle phase, and so has my own periods of stable living and focused research or work. Different cycles have brought different focuses or prime areas of work or research. Residing in different areas at different parts of the cycle has brought entirely new perceptions and changes in focus as the land beneath our feet seems to have its own magnetism and ways of responding to the changes in the sun and the planet's magnetic field. So some additional free flow notes on that. So we may be responding spiritually, intellectually in certain places because of how that land is responding and sending that energy back up to our feet. Whereas somewhere else, there may be some totally different magnetism in a mountain range area that's totally different. So I think that there are pluses and minuses to each area based on its magnetism and its proximity to even things like ley lines and other places of high energy. The current cycle has manifested a more evolved reality where I'm working for myself, sharing ideas that the world is more ready to hear. The coming cycle has the potential to bring new opportunities for all of us. Yesterday I talked about the eclipse. We saw a major change on our planet. Many of us noticed changes within ourselves over the course of the last month, but also changes in the world with a major earthquake that did not leave major damage off in the desert of Death Valley. What if the Earth is conscious enough to release some energy in some places without harming the humans on top of it? I'm left with a deepening confirmation that both the solar maxima and minima play off each other in a counterbalance of cosmic forces. They are both positive and negative sides to the solar personalities of the various highs and lows. Having looked directly at the ongoing solar influence over planetary affairs on a conscious level, not merely subconscious, I have a greater idea and memory of how the energies intensify after periods of quiet activity or the quiet before the storm, which we are in right now. We are in a deep solar minimum. Cosmic rays induced by this deep solar minimum have been detected in Northern California, up 18% since 2015. Oddly enough, we've seen more fighting since then. There's a new report about cosmic rays and its impact upon the binary code. You know what the binary code is? It's zeros and ones. Kind of like think about the Matrix, looking at the Matrix. The zeros and ones of this reality, somehow cosmic rays can flip the binary code. So we're going to cover that in a future report, as well as the report about the threat of multiple asteroids, 2022, 2024, 2029, and leading into the future. I believe dramatic shifts in the sun bring dramatic shifts in the geopolitical situation, as well as our inner spiritual and emotional states of being. Possessing full knowledge of our susceptibility to such changes can be redirected into personal life power by using the information to take back control of the direction of one's life and to break the necessary programming or codes, social or otherwise. If there are ways we can better improve our lives and spirits as we go through these cycles, we should discuss them and not allow the cloud of war and the new dark ages to prevent our inner light of knowledge from shining through the ongoing darkness of ignorance and despair. In 2017, the notes for the presentation were turned into an ebook. And the 267 slides can now be found right at the front, featured at otbtv.net and solarmaxnews.net. Now I'm presenting additional new information, views, and studies that are not in the ebook. I will release the 100 plus pages of original notes created in the last month over time, piece by piece, probably through the form of blogs. And as I build more and more and more and more and more information, this is the conclusion, by the way, I would like to create an awesome book that's printed as cheaply as possible. We're talking like a zine. If people coming across my content are involved in publishing, right? I don't want to do it through Amazon because of the cost. I want to get a book published in actual paper and to get it out to the most amount of people for the most affordable cost to print. And so my email is host@otbtv.net. That's all for now. I'm Alex Ansary. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you're new. Check out the Patreon page. I'll be back with more.